Fast forward, I was at dinner with a Fortune 50 chief communications officer, asking that person, how long would I be relevant after I leave my corporate career? And Joe, I didn't want to ask the question, but I did want to ask the question. I was kind of in between a rock and a hard place because I kind of knew what the answer may be. And that person actually put a time frame on it. They said a year to 18 months. Honestly, Joe, it was less about the title. I wasn't concerned about being relevant as a chief communications officer. It was as that practitioner who had been practicing for nearly 30 years. If you and I were in the same ecosystem, were you going to talk to me anymore?
Hey, welcome to Titans, Geoff. You had 30 years in biotech and pharma, and you had a sudden career exit in 2023. And this took you into a journey that prompted the title, Embracing Your Purgatory. Tell us about that life-changing transition, and then we'll launch off from there.
Well, thank you for having me first and foremost. I'm looking forward to the discussion. It was interesting. I think when you're confronted with a job change or any type of loss or any loss of something that has defined you for so long, it can be scary. And I think that's the best emotion to describe it. I didn't know what I was getting into or what was going to hit me until about a year on from when I actually exited my role. So I thought, just like I had done the majority of my career, oh, this was a bump in the road. This was an obstacle. As I write in the book, this is going to be a blip on the radar. I'm going to move on and I'm going to be fine. And whatever that next fine thing is, I'm going to find it quickly. I'm going to be able to keep myself busy. And I was just in that mindset. And so I think when things started to change a little bit psychologically and things started to hit me a little bit differently, that's when I noticed it was something a little bit more than just a job change.
Yeah, the word unraveling comes to mind, which seems odd, but I've been through the similar situation as well. And so having that transition and trying to be upbeat, okay, what's next? Looking forward. But then things seem to be almost slipping from your fingers, and then you have to go deeper to understand what's happening. I think that's fair, isn't it?
It is. It is. And I think unraveling is the right word because I think we ultimately get so comfortable in what we're doing. I use the concept of armor, kind of the armor being stripped away all of a sudden, and that you're exposed to something that you didn't really know or didn't really have a good idea of what was underneath because you had shielded yourself so long from any of that kind of emotional piece of what was going into your job or what was going into your career or how you were thinking about.
Yeah, armor is a great word too, because, we often think of it as just the defensive cocoon we put around ourselves.
Right.
But it's also comfort inside the armor, and things could be going relatively well with a career or your situation in life, and you keep bebopping along and all good. And then all of a sudden the armor is cracked or removed and you're exposed, and it's disconcerting, something that we're not well equipped for, or we have trained ourselves over time to not be able to really adapt to.
Yeah, because I don't think Joe, we don't really prepare for that thing that could happen. I think we're so comfortable that we don't know that something is coming, so we don't really prepare for it. And we don't do that kind of deep, often scary work to find out, okay, what's really underneath here? If this thing were to go away, if this armor were to be stripped away, what's really underneath there? And am I happy with that? Or am I okay
Yeah.
with what's underneath? And I don't think that's a little bit scary.
So how did that flesh out for you? I mean,
Well,
conceptually, we're talking conceptual things
yeah.
right now, but what was it like in real life to go through that process?
Well, in real life, I did exactly what I said I did a couple of minutes ago. I just kind of kept moving on. After I exited my corporate role, I immediately jumped into a fellowship at the University of Chicago. It was designed to help those who were in transition of some sort find out what is the next path, using your expertise to impact society in a different way. So I was trying to keep busy and doing the same things that I had done throughout my entire career. Just keep busy, just keep moving on. there were 2 points early on in the fellowship, actually one before I started the fellowship and then one during. The one before that I detail in the book was I was at a gathering of senior level communicators. It was a kind of a prestigious gathering. I'd never been invited before. This was the first time I'd been invited. Fast forward, I was at dinner with a Fortune 50 chief communications officer, asking that person, how long would I be relevant after I leave my corporate career? And Joe, I didn't want to ask the question, but I did want to ask the question. I was kind of in between a rock and a hard place because I kind of knew what the answer may be.
Yeah.
And that person actually put a time frame on it. They said a year to 18 months. And so that was a little bit scary thinking that, okay, well, what am I going to grasp onto if I'm not really relevant anymore in what I've been known for the last 30 years? So that was one thing. The other thing was the first session of the fellowship where I just was in a room with 19 others in my cohort. I was the youngest in the cohort, and I just felt outmatched, outclassed, no longer an expert in the room where I had been many times an expert in the room. And that just hit me in a different way because I didn't have anything really protecting me anymore, anything to fall back on. And so those two things stand out as, whoa, I'm having, as we just said, the
Mhm.
armor stripped away. And I don't know how to handle this because that expertise was so protective before
Mm.
that it did a number on me psychologically.
Well, that's interesting because it showed up that way because in a way, using the armor metaphor, you were in a friendly community that was aligned with your career, right?
Yeah, it was,
But
and that,
yet
yeah,
but yet even that, you were still the identity of you being in the role, there was still a separation that was beginning to occur. You were kind of coming out of that armor, although but still kind of with comrades, if you will.
yeah, and I think that was what made it a bit difficult too, was being in that community still, but knowing that that armor was likely going to come off, and then just kind of hit with that relevance question. I mean, it took me aback.
So the relevance question kind of crosses into the whole identity and self-worth
Yeah, it
framing, right?
it
So tell
definitely
me about
does.
that. Tell
Yeah, I
me.
mean, it definitely does because I don't think we, excuse me, often think about how when we're in role, what exactly relevance means and kind of how we define it. It's just kind of the definition is placed on us because we're in the role of chief communications officer or been in communications for an extended period of time, and that what makes you relevant within the ecosystem within you with which you operate. And I don't know that we often think about that piece of it. So when that is, you're not operating in that environment anymore, and that is kind of stripped away and trying to find a new definition of relevance, whether that it means staying in the current ecosystem if you want to do that, or moving in a totally different direction if you want to do that, there's a definition that kind of needs to happen and thought process that needs to happen in a different way. And so
Yeah.
it was something that I didn't think was going to hit me because I never really questioned the relevance in the past.
Yeah, that's interesting. The identity and the relevance are tied to maybe, and I don't want to overuse this, but it's used often, tied to the title or the position, a master practitioner within that title or position, right? When you pose the question about relevance to the other person there, it seems to me, I don't know, I went to, am I going to become dated or not known versus sort of that idea of having all that experience and credibility and knowledge. Was there any of that kind of dynamic? Was it just a being dated in the information, or was it kind of being lost or not as known in the active community?
I think it was just an wanting to understand what was going to happen to me and how were people going to interact with me moving forward, because I'd put so much emphasis and weight into how people interacted with me in the ecosystem. Back to something you alluded to before, honestly, Joe, it was less about the title. I wasn't concerned about being relevant as a chief communications officer. It was as that practitioner who had been practicing for nearly 30 years, knowing the same people,
Right.
knowing my ecosystem. And so it was what was going to happen to me. So I guess a little bit dated, but also more so, frankly, Joe, if you and I were in the same ecosystem, were you going to talk to me anymore?
Yeah, yeah. Were you on the short list of people I would call?
Right,
Right.
exactly. And I think that may sound silly, but it's just one of those things that you kind of think about over time to say, okay, I have a year to basically clean things up or say goodbye to people who I may not speak with for a long time because I'm just not in that space anymore or may not be in that space anymore.
Now I'm realizing as I'm talking to you that when I retired, I went through something very similar. It kind of happened. I had planned it, but it happened around the COVID pandemic, right around that time frame. And I had been volunteering and facilitating a community of CIOs, and I continued doing that, and I wanted to continue doing that, and I monetized it, but even more than that, I think I was afraid, without even knowing it at a conscious level, of separating from the
Hmm.
community. And over time, now it's been 6 years, but over time, the knowledge part, and that's why I asked that question of staying up to date on the technology shifts and the latest news became more of a concern for me, even as a facilitator of that community. So, anyway, personal story just to underscore what you have stated that we all go through, I think men in particular.
Yeah, and I think too, Joe, one important point about what you just said is that it's also you can redefine kind of what knowledge you need to have. Do you need to stay up to date on all of the tech
Right.
stuff, or do I need to stay up to date on all of the communication stuff? Probably not, unless it relates to the charting a new path that I may be on. And if I do, I think that's a little bit of the freedom in it too, is that you can kind of pick and choose what relevant means to you now and how up to date you need to stay on certain things,
Yeah.
as long as you're staying up to date on the things that match kind of the path that you're on now.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, even in that community, I've had conversations with a few of the members, and they have said, "Well, don't worry about that. You have a lot of experience in how to, lead change
Right.
and leadership issues, and that's really what we're looking for from you, and the facilitation part of it, which was a relief, and it was something that I was hoping for, but I wasn't really didn't have my eyeballs on it as much because again, there's this really strong pull. I mean, you spend 35 years doing something or 30 years doing something. And as much as you might be aware in your conscious mind about this whole identity thing to the role and the position, still a strong pull.
When you just said that, I bet that was refreshing when that community
It
said,
was.
here's what we need from you.
It
Because
was
then
very refreshing.
it
Yeah.
kind of then redefines for you without having to worry about it. Okay, great. Now I'm in a space where I actually know what people need from me based on knowledge that I still have that's never going to go away.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the neat part about it as well, is that if you can find that community that then defines that for you or helps define that for you, it takes a lot of pressure off yourself to kind of always chase it.
Can we pivot a little bit now on this idea of it being a little harder for men? One of them is this thing that is tied around of how we identify ourselves, but also we're not great at being vulnerable. We have this defensive Achilles defensive posture where we don't want to show our flank to anybody. It's hard for men to admit if they're struggling with almost anything, to be honest. But can we dive into that a little bit? I know you talk about this a little bit.
I'm going to make a very broad statement. I mean, for me, it wasn't necessarily, I always felt that I've been vulnerable, but
Mhm.
not necessarily vulnerable to the people who may have needed it in order to learn.
Mm.
And it took a lot of work for me to kind of get there to at least be a little bit more transparent and vulnerable. The broad statement I want to make is that I think it's just a lot of it's fear. It's fear that we've kind of pointed to earlier in our discussion about really what's underneath and what really makes you who you are, and really exploring that and understanding that can be a little bit scary. And it can be a little bit scary to say what those things are out loud. And I think we get in leadership positions and we think that vulnerability is weakness and we're scared to present as weak. And two examples I want to point to very quickly is former colleague of mine, actually a direct report. I write about imposter syndrome a lot in the book, and we had lunch probably 3 weeks ago, and he said, I suffer from imposter syndrome too, and it was fascinating to read about you suffering from imposter syndrome. Why didn't we ever talk about that in the context of work or during one of our one-on-ones? And my question back was, I don't know, why didn't we? And it was, I think both of us had this realization that he didn't want me to probably perceive him as weak or have vulnerability. And I probably subconsciously didn't want him to perceive me that way because I was leading the function. And that is strange. I mean, it's very strange. And we could have easily had a very nice discussion about things that we were going through. And I find myself, even through the writing process, yes, being more vulnerable. But even yesterday, another story, I was having lunch with someone who I'm on a board with, and they said, you seem like you're at peace. And I said, I'm not. And I said, I'm not. And he said, really? Well, you externally present like you are at peace. And so, Joe, I'm still, I guess, fearful of a little bit of that vulnerability as well in the context of people who I interact with. So it's just, to me, fear of being comfortable or fear of presenting too vulnerable and then getting to a point where you're comfortable in doing it. But the feedback from men that I'm getting is it always starts the same. It's an email that says, I don't know if you knew this about me, but, and then it's 4 paragraphs of issues that they've gone through. And for me, that's great because that's why I wrote the book. I wanted to create permission for people, not just men, to start to have these types of conversations that we're having right now, but in closed venues as well.
Yeah. Well, the book is important because you, in a way, you open the door for people to reach out to you. You know, your earlier point about your colleague, the guy that worked for you, and yourself reflecting about why you didn't express your fears or your whole vulnerability question with each other was interesting because it's almost like you go first.
Right.
Which is, we're laughing about that. But to me, that's a strength for a leader in particular, but anybody. I mean, you're leading and influencing others, even if you're not in a position, by demonstrating that you can go first and be open and transparent. That brings people into a sense of being able to trust you because you've gone first to trust them with that. Now, is it dangerous? Sure. But if you know, over time, you get more and more grounded on who you are, apart from titles and anything else, and not needing the approval of others. Easy for me to just verbalize. When you get to that place, then you're more free to be able to take the first step.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point because it's the approval of others is such a big factor, as you just mentioned, that we don't give enough attention to. And I think it's all subliminal as well. It's we think we need external validation in order to move forward. And you're right. When you get to the point, and I think it's the point I got to the book where I had to write it in a way that was going to be true to me in the context of now knowing that I don't really need approval of anyone. But it's still the hardest battle to fight right now. If I get a random 2-star review on Goodreads or Amazon, I'm thinking, okay, ouch, yeah, exactly, knife to the heart, and with no comments, it's just a 2-star review. I'm thinking, okay, what do I need? And it's still that external validation and approval thing that you still triggers you in this context as well. And you have to, that's a battle you have to continue to fight.
Science has proved this out that we are hardwired to prioritize the negative to protect ourselves and to survive. And so you take positive comment, negative comment, and we're going to respond more to the negative comment than we will to the positive one. And so trying to make everyone feel better by saying, if you're triggered, it's okay, you know, and maybe you feel like you shouldn't be, but we're fighting evolutionary biology here a little bit.
Well, and what weighs into that now in our present time is social media. If you
Yeah.
just if you
Well,
just look
then,
if you just look at LinkedIn
yeah.
alone, and I'm guilty of this too, we're posting about the finished product, Joe. We're not posting about all of the work that it took to get to that finished product. And we're very afraid to say publicly that we're not finished. And not only the evolutionary biology that you mentioned, but now the external forces that are fighting against us, where you have to absolutely be polished in order to present yourself in a certain way and get that external validation, whatever it may be. People run away from the work that actually went into getting to that point, which is really the learning piece of it.
Yeah. It's a journey.
It is. It
It's
is.
definitely a journey. I often, when I coach people, I find that like mid-level managers, even some senior managers, leaders are feeling stuck. And when I ask about their relationship with their one up, their boss, and how that goes, there's often a lot of frustration about, I'm not recognized, you're not listening to me. And this is another signal, I think, of what are you looking for? And this is keeping you from actually showing up fully
Right.
so that you will be trusted. Are you thinking about what your boss or your manager needs for them to be successful? But you walk into the room saying, I have all this experience. I need to get the approval up front
Right.
without the work, right?
Right.
It's not the real world. Whether
Right.
you want it to be that way or not, it's just not the way it operates.
That's so right too. And the other thing I will add too is that too often there is often mismatch in that relationship from a vulnerability and empathy standpoint. And so that's the other kind of tough piece of
Mhm.
it. If the direct report is coming in with more vulnerability and more empathy or humility, and the leader or your manager is not there, that's going to be a difficult mismatch as well. So not only may you not get the external validation, but you may not get the depth of relationship that you think you need to be internally validated.
Yeah.
And so that's a very interesting battle that
There's
that
certainly a lot more to it. Yeah, it's really good to point that out for sure. So, turning it outward, Future Voices Collective.
yes.
Tell me about that.
So it's the passion project for me and my wife. I'm a first gen college graduate and obviously spent nearly 30 years in the communications industry. So we wanted to find a way to turn my experiences in both fronts into something that could be helpful for the next generation of communicators. And so we launched a fellowship program officially about a month ago. Our first cohort is going to start in September. 23 students from 6 different universities. And we are really focused on how we help those students have durable and meaningful careers in industry, but also economically mobile careers within industry. And how do we get them better prepared to have some longevity and, importantly, amplify the skill set that first generation students have that, in my opinion, is in demand right now from an employer standpoint, but also address some of the obstacles that may exist. So we're going to be in a pilot for probably about 2 years because it's a 2 year fellowship, and we're going to see how things go. I mean, but it's, for me, it's one of those, back to our earlier discussion, not that I so much need to be relevant as much anymore, but I'm learning that I'm relevant from a skill standpoint, as you pointed out, kind of knowledge, experience, life experience more than career experience in a different way. And that is kind of the journey that I'm on, is that I'm trying to find success in air quotes through different mechanisms, different metrics, but also finding out what kind of gives me joy and meaning as I start to move forward outside of their traditional career.
To be able to work with your wife on a passion project like this, it sounds exciting. And you're talking about teaching them the skills. And you alluded to, and the other obstacles, I mean, some of that I imagine you're going to bring in some of what we've been talking about in terms of what it's like to work in a career and what sets some expectations up front as
Yeah,
well. Is that part of it?
that is definitely part of it. I mean, so there's a lot of research about kind of obstacles, but also skill sets from a first gen standpoint. But using my experience in that, I really didn't know how to navigate networks. I didn't know how to negotiate salary. I didn't know kind of the ins and outs of industry I was getting into. My career kind of happened by accident. I fell into the healthcare pharma biotech space by accident. Didn't have a lot of background there, but also didn't know from my parents' experience on how to navigate a corporate world and how to do certain things. And so that's kind of the preparation we're helping with, is that how do you just accentuate not only your experiences and your story to leverage those into good careers, but how are you better equipped? And me saying that I've been there, I may have different experiences than these students. I know I have had different experiences than these students, but I've been in places where they're likely going to be. And here's what I didn't know, and here's what you need to know. So hopefully we can get them better prepared to navigate the world they'll enter into.
Okay. I'd like to pivot to the book now.
Okay.
Can you tell us about the book?
Yes, available on Amazon, available on Barnes and Noble online.
Title?
Embracing Your Own Purgatory. And again, based on what we've been talking about, I got to a point in 2024 where I was really depressed with my life, and I didn't know where I was going and what I was doing. Always thought that I had a book in me, but I didn't know exactly what it was going to be. The original concept was a communicator who couldn't communicate his own transition.
Hmm.
And that would have been kind of a little bit more businessy focused, and I didn't know if I wanted to go exactly there. And then when I was talking to the publisher, I really started working through a concept of how can we learn to be more comfortable with discomfort that exists in our lives? And when we do lose something that has defined us, whether it's job, whether it's loss of a loved one, whether it's loss of a relationship, anything, how do we act and how can we be productive in those times? But in that kind of journey in writing and really reflection throughout my life, I noticed some patterns that I had throughout my career, things that I did, deep emotional avoidance in certain situations that I masked with work. And so I wasn't dealing with a lot of things. And so throughout the book, I deal with things as we've been talking about: professional identity purgatory, purpose purgatory, perceived loss of expertise, all of those things through my story, but also the story of others. I interview probably 6 people throughout the book who are in different points in their lives and careers and journeys. And I really wanted to get to the heart at, okay, am I experiencing similar things that other people experience? And how did they act in those situations? And how did they react? And how did they move on? And I think the key piece of it, I wrote it while I was still in it. And frankly, I'm still in it and trying to find that path out. And I really wanted to say, back to the unfinished piece of it, that it's okay to be unfinished. I'm unfinished, and here's my journey through it. And I don't have a plan at the end. I don't give anybody 5 steps on how to navigate this. It's more permission. It's more permission to talk about this stuff out loud. And that's the step I wanted to take. I wrote the book for myself, but with no audience in mind, really. But now I'm starting to, again, as we talked about, to hear from men, from others in transition, from others who have lost loved ones, all of the things.
It seems like it's very cathartic for other people to read the book and realize they're not alone, and realize that, and also benefit from some of your learnings. I love the fact that you are humble enough to say you haven't got it all wired and nailed down and you're still in process. But I'm sure there's lots of observations and lessons learned to be very beneficial to folks.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I hope so, because again, the pushback that I'm getting is that it's not the right book for people who want to plan, but it's the right book for people who just want to hear how people express how they're feeling. And I think that's one thing, at least, that I'm learning. The other thing is that through feedback, I'm seeing that people are able to now put themselves in certain scenarios, in certain situations, or at least be better prepared when things may happen. And that's exactly what I wanted people to get out of the book.
Do you think, are there certain entry points? Was there 2 or 3 different situations they were in? Were they sensing they were going to go through a transition like this, or were they already in it? Or why did they come to your book? Could you resonate with other people on the journey who have found value in reading your book?
So I'll point to two or three quick stories that came my way.
Great.
The first was I write a chapter about when my father passed away in 2007. And my behavior during that time and my behavior since I was in industry, I was kind of ignoring the emotional components of it, trying to fix him. So, networking with physicians, doctors, all of those people to try to help fix him. But I was ignoring the emotional component of it. And one of our last conversations was about passwords, bank passwords, UK passwords, all of those things.
Mm.
That was one of our last meaningful conversations. And so fast forward to somebody, I kind of teased that chapter via LinkedIn in one of the pre-promotion things. And somebody who I used to work with was in the hospital with a loved one. And that person noticed that they were sitting by their hospital bed on their laptop at 10 p.m. doing work. And so just even a brief story resonated with them to say, I'm not going to do that anymore. And I realized the importance of being present and being present for those around me, regardless of the situation. And this is not what's the most important thing. The person, wherever they may be, in a hospital bed next to you, just on the couch, that's the place I should be. Similarly, it was a colleague from industry who unfortunately had lost a child in childbirth and came to me and said, I was already preparing for my identity as a mother, and now I'm not going to be, and now I'm not a mother. And so it's just people dissecting differently what it means as identity, what it means as present, just in different scenarios. I think those are two primary entry points I point to because that is the unlikely thing that I think people go to when you're thinking about a transition. You often think of the career transition, but you don't think of all of the other identity factors that make up our different pieces of our lives. But aside from that, I think the imposter syndrome is a big one, and people pointing
Yeah.
to, as I already pointed out, other relational type of things and how I was thinking in certain situations are really attractive to people coming to me and saying, I did the exact same thing, or I did the exact same thing when I jumped from job to job. I was really emotionally avoiding things. There are many entry points throughout the book for people.
For those who read the book and want to reach you, what's the best way of doing that?
The best way to reach me is on LinkedIn. Geoffrey Curtis is my profile. And if the people would like to buy the book on Amazon, as I mentioned, barnesandnoble.com, and popping up in libraries here and there. So that's everything's exciting.
Besides this passion project we talked about, Future Voices Collective, are there other things you are doing as well? Or do you have like consulting services or giving
Yeah.
talk?
Yeah, I'm doing a little bit of coaching here and there just for people in industry, mostly mid-level managers to senior level managers. But I know that if Future Voices Collective is going to work, I have to devote a majority of my time to that because I really want to see this work. It's, as I mentioned, it's a passion. I love helping students, love speaking with students, speak with so many in a given month that I've lost count, but it's so fun. And I'm so committed to making sure that they succeed, um, that I kind of have to, at this time, devote my full attention to it.
Talking about students, one recurring theme that's come up in my interviews has been the idea that we often pursue a career based upon what we hear others say would be good to do when they're reading us. This is a period of time when people are starting to nail down their direction, or at least they think they are. Many people go through major shifts. I certainly have. How did you come into your career? Was it something that you thought you were going to do? Did you feel like you were always going to be involved with communications or writing from an early age, or is it something that you pivoted into? I'm just kind of curious about your story.
Yeah, I was an English writing major undergrad.
Sounds pretty close.
So, but I didn't know what I was going to do with that. I think everybody hears English, they automatically think teaching. And just at the time when I was in school, we didn't necessarily have a robust career advancement center. So I was kind of searching and doing things on my own to find out where a specific skill set or where a major may fit. I really didn't know. I knew at the time I didn't want to teach. So I did internship in the advertising publishing industry where I was doing some writing, had a PR internship at a small agency that gave me actually my first job. Then, Joe, honestly, there was a large PR firm in Chicago where, to what you just said, people said, you have to go work there if you're going to be in this career. And I listened to that.
Yeah.
But the whole PR career, even after that first job at a small boutique agency, I didn't know if it was for me. And so when I went and interviewed at that large agency, I initially interviewed for a consumer tech team job and didn't get that job. And they said, go try healthcare. They're hiring. And I fell into it, as I think I mentioned earlier, by accident. I didn't have a biology background, any science background, and just fell into it by accident, loved it, and built a career out of it. But in those early stages, I didn't have somebody telling me that, oh, your first job's not going to be your last job. And so I was still kind of finding my own way and just what I like to do. And I liked it enough where I said, okay, yeah, let's try this, or let's keep trying this.
And I think trial and error is absolutely great because it's hard to discover that Ikigai thing in a Venn diagram of your abilities, your gifting, all the different factors. And one of the signals in coaching that I have that a person might be in the wrong area, in a career, if they feel like they're pushing a rock up a hill all the time, then they're probably not aligned. I'm really big on, your natural gifting. And so often people will get into a place where they, quote, love something and it's really the right fit for them because they get energy out of it. You still have to work hard, but, not just draining energy.
Yeah,
Draining energy is a big signal.
and people underestimate, to your point, the positive energy that actual job can provide, and really paying attention to that. I don't think, again, people pay attention to the energy they're actually getting, because I think get to a certain point where they're so enmeshed that they're not really concerned about the energy. They're concerned about doing the job and checking the box. But if you don't pay attention to that, then you don't know if that next thing is the right thing, frankly, if you don't know where you get your energy. And I think defining that energy source is a big thing.
I like to ask the question that's overasked, but I think it's still very valuable. And that is, looking back on your career, would there be some advice you would give to your younger self?
100%. And I'm glad you asked. Be present. I didn't know what being present meant. And whether that's for family, loved ones, colleagues, I wasn't present. And I think through the process that I investigated in the book, I'm now rebuilding some friendships, rebuilding some relationships, because I was so focused and enmeshed in my career and my job. And I just wasn't present enough for everyone. And I think that stands out to me because my wife has always said that she knew the job came first, always, for me. And that's to hear. Again, we're fine, and obviously we're working together doing a lot of different things, but that's one of the realizations that you have to have when you go through a process like this, is you have to hear that type of feedback. And so that obviously sets me in a direction that, okay, I need to do things differently. And so that's the piece of advice that really stands out for me. And I think that people earlier in their career should learn, because you can have both. You can be present, you can live a life and still have a very successful career. And the last thing I'll say about this is, I was speaking with a rising senior in college, probably about a month ago. And we had met for the first time. And she said, I want to go into this career, but I just enjoy living life and having fun. And I said, you know what? You can do both. You can have a successful career and still enjoy life. I said, take it from me, because I didn't. And I'm learning how to do that now. And so the fact that she was thinking about that at an early age, about bifurcating those things and having two potentially different identities, awesome, great. Need to hear more of that, and need to hear more people who can focus on those things, not at the expense of one or the other. And hopefully more people can start to have that realization.
And being present isn't just the dynamic of being home with your family. It's also being present even in the office or the virtual office these days, and listening to others and being present to really hear them instead of getting in your own world, your own lane. There's also, I think, a false messaging that is out there that if you're not committed, in your role, that means, or if you're not working many, many hours, you're not committed. And it's just wrong. It's this time on the clock versus contribution or actual results obtained. It's just wrong-headed. Being busy and being running around doesn't mean you're adding any value at all. And I had a great friend, I'll call him out, Geoff, years ago, 16-hour days in my career. And he was younger than me. He worked for me. And then he just said, well, it's all arbitrary. And I go, what are you talking about? He goes, you can't work more than 24 hours a day. You probably can't even work 24 hours a day. At some point, you have to draw a line. So the question is, when do you draw the line? The light bulb really went off. And I realized that if I always knew, at the end of a normal work day of 8 or 9 hours, that I still had 4 or 5 more hours when people left the office, that I could still get work done, made me very inefficient in how I used my time during those first 8 hours.
Yep. Something I talk about in the book too. It's busyness doesn't equal productivity. And you alluded to that. And that's, I think, the hardest part now is finding out, okay, what is actually productive busy look like? And again, it all ties together to energy, to passion, to those things. And so that's why I find that with Future Voices Collective in particular, it's that is productive busy. And I'm fine with that, but I need to get used to that feeling.
Well, Geoff, I make an offer to you. If you want to get back together again after the Future Voices Collective has been running for a while, and we can maybe revisit how that's going, I would love to do that, to hear from you.
I would love to. I'd love to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I just encourage everyone. I will definitely have links in the show notes to get to the book and to find Geoff on LinkedIn. But I encourage you, if you've resonated, you pick up a copy of Geoff's book. I just love the honesty, and a lot of what he has shared with me on camera and off camera, I just resonate as being truth. And there's so much BS out there that it's refreshing. So, Geoff, thank you so much for coming on Titans of Transition. I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom.
Thank you, Joe. Really enjoyed this conversation.
Hey, thanks for joining me today on Titans of Transition. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please check the show notes for additional information.